Welcome to Lead Live, a conversation for ministry leaders by ministry leaders. I'm Josh Franks.
And I'm Clint and we're the co-founders of the Lead program. Today on the show, we're joined by Dr. Malek to talk mental health and the biology of grace. Josh, how you doing, bro?
Good, man. How are you doing? It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Yeah, welcome back to another edition of Lead Live. For those of you who are joining us online, we're really glad that you're with us, and we are super pumped about our guest today on the show. Josh, everyone is starting to talk about mental health, getting back to normal. What is the new normal going to look like? But I think, hold on a second. It was my opinion. Hold on real quick. We're still in the now. Don't fast forward to 6 months down the road, 3 months down the road, maybe even 4 weeks down the road. We still have to be present in the now, and we're walking people through mental health issues as we're still trying to be relationally connected, but socially distant. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's totally true. More so than any time in the last several days, I've talked to people who are feeling more crazy, antsy, cabin feverish than before. And I think that desire to get back to normal and even jump the gun, whatever that may look like, is just a desire to control what feels uncontrollable. Right. And so that is the reality that we're in and the things that people are really feeling and processing through. So I'm really excited for this conversation today because we all need some help with this for sure. I know I do.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm starting to really, kind of go through these cycles. It's almost like grieving, and you don't feel like anything is dying, but it is. Like sometimes I'm angry, and sometimes I'm a little somber and sad, and sometimes I've come to a kind of a resolution about it, and you kind of plow forward, and I'm into this grief cycle a little bit. So today on the show, Dr. Malek joins us for this conversation, and it was so intriguing. We were just having a conversation. I was picking her brain a little bit. She was, just trying to get her head wrapped around a little further on some SDI training, strengths deployment inventory, and she mentioned a biology of grace. And as soon as she said it, I went, wait a second, we've got to have this talk for our leaders. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Malek. Mary!
Hey guys.
You just appear. It's like, bam.
It's like magic.
So good. Hey, thanks for being with for being with Josh and I on Lead Live today. And we're going to frame this up for people. We want to talk about mental health. We want to give people kind of a framework to kind of think through this time. I've got questions about trauma because you are a trauma therapist, and I want you to unpack a little bit more of your background. But there are so many different topics that we're going to explore. We want to do a little bit of like a workshop for a minute or two. So I'm super excited about our conversation with you today.
You got a lot planned for this time.
And listen, I'm paying for this hour, so I got to maximize. I'm just kidding. Hey, so first off, explain who you are. Give us a little bit of your background, especially when it comes to psychology.
I am secularly trained. So I think for those people in the faith tradition, I came through regular Ohio State and Kent State. I actually wanted to be a veterinarian for my whole childhood, but God had a different plan. So became a Christian in the middle of grad school, getting a master's and doctorate in clinical psychology. Have always worked through the body. So meaning seeing people as a whole. And so often mental health is just viewed as this thing. But for me, I trained as a health psychologist. So I worked in medical settings. I've been on clinical faculty out at UCOM, now NeoMed, working with physicians, medical students, but patients, dealing with physical disorders in their bodies. So my orientation has always been very much the body and the mind together. I've never viewed them separately. And now, thankfully, we're at a stage in the game where that's a more widely accepted view. So I work primarily in private practice up here in Twinsburg and do a lot of consultation. I do a lot of training through what's called somatic experiencing, which is healing the mind through the body. Because what we say in the field is that the body keeps the score. So our minds can play tricks and tell us things, but the body doesn't lie. So it's really amazing work. And in that journey, then really pursuing God's truth for all this, because I think it is important to say that I've trained through secular training, meaning I'm not through faith-based training. And so what started happening for me was, I'm like, Lord, I'm hearing these things. I'm getting trained by people who, very staunch evolutionists believe that, we've had amphibious brains, and their view of how we operate and why we operate that way is very different from somebody who has a theology of the body, and which is brilliant and amazing. And so then as I started diving into this, I'm like, oh, wait, this started thinking about grace and like why it's hard to be gracious at certain times. So that's really how I kind of landed what really God gave me, this idea of the biology of grace, which pretty much gets us here.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. So can you first give us a glossary overview of what does social isolation do for a person? I mean, I'm not completely isolated. I'm with my family, but there's still isolation happening. But can you just give us a quick overview of potentially what goes on in a person, in their body and in their mind and in their spirit when they're isolated?
Well, that's a big one. Okay, let me think that through. So if you think about most of us, if you think about holistically, there's 5 axes to who we are as people, right? There's who we are emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, and relationally. It's critical to understand that God designed us relationally, first and foremost, between himself and us. And then we have the between us and other people. It's a critical feature of who we are. So if you think about, I was looking for something, but like a net that creates who you are, and there's these 5 threads. And then all of a sudden now what you're being told is you have to really start to pull away one of those threads. So we become more vulnerable. For myself, I can speak, for example, I'm fairly extroverted, but I'm also a verbal processor, as your wife could attest to. Is that so? I really feel lost because I feel more clearly, think more clearly, behave more clearly when I can spit things out. Well, now I'm isolated. So there's a strain on the system when you've lost the natural flow of how to interact, so we're feeling a little jammed up in our systems, right? It's the natural inclination to reach out is getting jammed up in it. We're like, oh, I'm going to go out. Oh, no, I'm not. And we're all feeling that right now. And so we start to live in a more pressurized body, a more pressurized system.
So I've heard people talking about trauma, right? And I know that you have done extensively trauma therapies and different things. Yeah. Is this situation traumatic? Like, I understand New York City, you're in I mean, people are super sick and they are dying from this COVID-19 thing. So I don't want to diminish at all.
Right.
But I do want to, like, some people are like, oh, this is so traumatic. My extrovert is dying, so really? Like,
well,
so, I mean, tell me about, like, where are we on the spectrum of traumatic?
Well, there's a difference between traumatic and dramatic. So it's a little bit of what you're but I think this is the way I explain. Trauma is determined not by the incident itself, but let me just describe one way I think about it. You can watch the news and say there's been a tornado, and they could interview 10 people, and you will see 10 people who had radically different experiences through that. Okay. So it was in fact a tornado that was very damaging. Yet there'll be some people who are what we call highly resourced, and meaning they have social resources, they have faith resources, they have emotional they're resilient people, and they actually came through that with a power and an empowerment and doing well, right? And a focus. Other people may have been traumatized by it. So trauma is defined by our capacity. Well, one of the things that the terms that we use in our field is a window of tolerance. How much tolerance do you have for the distress coming into your system? So right now, this isolation in and of itself may not be traumatizing to someone, but it can be pushing the ledges of that window closer and closer so that when something does come into your life, you don't have quite as much available to deal with it. So I wouldn't say, I hesitate saying things in global statements, but in general, what I say is things don't necessarily tend to be inherently traumatizing. Now, developmentally, that's another issue. So here's an example to kind of explain that. A parent will use the scenario of a parent leaves the room for 3 hours. Okay. So if you're 13 and you're fairly well adjusted, right? 13-year-old, but you're thinking, oh yeah, I got 3 hours. Great. Mm-hmm. Right. Maybe wishing for longer, non-traumatizing. Okay. Right. Take that though to a 3-week-old infant. Take that to, right, a 3-month-old. And you can see that what we're talking about then there in the important feature is, what's the person's window of tolerance? So does that make, and it's a pretty simple definition or way to think about it, but I think it can help kind of clarify, where does the experience land, right? The context into which it's being experienced.
So while a 13-year-old might be like, yeah, 3 hours, mm-hmm. An adult might think about, 3 weeks by myself, that could be pretty cool. But even then, that boundary, we're getting pushed on that. It's like, wait a second, nope. I need to have more interaction than this. So last night, Christina and I and the kids went on a walk, and I'm just like, I'm going to walk over to our friend's house, and I'm going to yell at them through their window. And so they open up their window, and they're like king and queen in the castle, and we're, yelling at each other. We're like, we're going to come down, and we'll just stay 6 feet apart. We're like, okay, great. But I'm just like, I'm just going to go and yell at them anyway, because there have been so few social interactions that I actually want to have. It's not like just going to the store, throwing the mask on. Right. I want to engage with these people. And it was still the weirdest thing to stand outside their house, be distant, when we're used to, hey, how you doing? And throwing a hug on and, that sort of thing. It was so strange. So it is. I understand what you're saying about that capacity.
Right. Well, and you also identified something really critical. What's going on is when this thing first happened, right? We're like, oh, okay. And we were orienting to it, which gets into, if it's okay, I'll get into a little bit of the biology right now, because it's a critical thing. So there's this thing that if any of us have dogs or cats or pets, we do this thing. We're like, hey, did you hear that? And we watch her and we're like, we mess with them, right? Our dog, hey, did you hear that? Right. So that's an orienting reflex. It's the impulse. And you can see that it involves this part of the body, but it really involves eyes, ears, your 5 senses. They get upright and they orient. Okay. It's just like a compass for anybody. It's like you want a compass that orients to north, right? The way it's supposed to. So it's really amazing, but this is in the biology. This is what's wired into us. God's given us this nervous system, and we can orient to what's going on around us. What we notice now happening is, hey, I don't know how, I'm not counting weeks because that stopped being useful a long time ago to me. But when this thing first happened, I'm like, hey, I could, this sounds interesting, right? And then a week goes in and I'm like, and I could feel myself and you can see my brow like, hey, I don't know, right? And then now we're a few weeks in, I'm like, all right, man, I'm out of it. We got to be moving on. And so we're orienting to time differently, right? We're orienting to people differently. And so this is very much in our nervous systems, how, again, God wired us to be interacting with people, to be craving that connection. Now we're being said, oh no. Or when you're orienting people to the grocery store or whatever, they've got the mask. Yeah. This is another thing that gets interesting, right? Is that now what we're noticing, it's so much more stressful, because watch what happens is that you're gaining all this feedback. You can tell them smile, you can watch. We socially engage with one another with all these amazing muscles, but then we lose that information. And so now we're left with, just the eyes basically. And so we're orienting. Now we're kind of maybe checking out lower in the body. Now we're trying to get a feel for what people are, experiencing and what they're trying to communicate to us. So the long-term consequences of this, are really interesting.
Wow. So talk a little bit about that. How does the progression of consequences happen with some of these things? Obviously there's long-term where if some type of experience, no matter your capacity, if it happens long enough, your window ends up, it's all the way, whether you started here or you started with a much wider capacity. So what are some of the things that people may see physically,
Yeah.
emotionally? How
you mean as their windows get pressed upon?
Yeah.
I think what I would correct in what you're saying there is that we have some control over, we can develop the capacity to control this. Okay. So yes, our windows are being pressed upon. Okay. I think what's, so one of the things you're going to be seeing is different things. So there's two ways to go when you're in this window. Some people will go more toward a fight response in their, their sympathetic nervous system will get more of a charge to it where they're like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to crush this thing. I know Clint and I talked, he's like, I'm all over this thing. I'm going to crush it. I'm like, okay, and I kind of am too. But then some people go into a freeze. It's like immobilization, right?
Yeah.
More the freeze, or even like potato bug, kind of just, I can't cope, right? So again, it really depends on how it hits you. So let's think about just the face mask thing. Like say we go on and on and on. For us as adults, it's going to hit us differently to go for months, perhaps. I'm just saying if this happens, to see people in a face mask. It's going to change the experience. If you're a toddler right now, if you're a younger person, it's going to be part now of your developing nervous system that you went through a period of time in your life where everybody's wearing face masks. Wow. So does that make some sense? I mean, so how does it affect you? It's like, you could be starting to see grumpiness, irritability, a struggle to social, like we're here hanging out, we're having a conversation and we're relaxed and we're watching each other and we're engaged. We call it socially engaged. But as you start to either go into the freeze or into the fight, what happens is in that orientations, the same places in our body that are used to orient are also used, watch your eyes, your ears, to socially engage. So when I'm orienting to a threat, so right now we're orienting to an invisible threat that could be anywhere or everywhere. So right there, what's happening is it elevates the nervous system because it's orienting, right? We're all sort of wondering. We might be thinking about it, but it's altered our experience because we're orienting to this threat. So that's chewing up and taking up some of the nervous system availability to be socially engaged in a calm and relaxed way. It's a very simplistic way. I just said to explain that. But did that make some sense?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, because then even in social environments on my walk last night, I'm still on edge because I don't know if I'm safe or not.
That's right. That's right. And there you go. There's that word of safety, is that when we feel for the most part safe, our nervous systems are settled and we can socially engage, right? And so this is where my language of biology of grace can come in, where God really stitched this in. I'm like, wait a minute, this is getting intriguing, because as Christians, we're told, wait, we need to be gracious toward one another. We need to be offering grace and love. And it's really challenging. You're in a conflict. If your nervous system is oriented to threat, and I'm imagining it's over here to my right, and then I'm going to try to act like I love you, right? Or like, I'm like, I'm in a conflict there. My nervous system is sort of polarized. So the biology of it is, okay, wait a minute. I've got to get my system to the place where I feel safe, and then I can engage and grant you grace. I'll give you the one thing I think God gave me was, we go to the zoo, and obviously if we don't have any issues with animals being in containment, but in general, go to the zoo. What makes it possible to have fun when you're watching the lions and let's just talk about the big cats? So this is not a rhetorical question. How is it that you're able to have fun when you're watching those animals at the zoo?
Yeah, you know that they're restricted by a fence or a moat or a big, thick glass wall.
That's right. You're safe. And if you're not so sure, you can pound on the glass, you can check it out, right? You know that. And then you can orient to that and say, okay, wow, I feel, yep. And then now it's like, oh, and then you can watch people's faces like, oh, isn't it? And our voices change and our muscles soften. We're like, oh, and look, kids, and look at the big cat right?
Yeah.
Right. Way different than if you're out and you're at the zoo and the tiger has gotten loose and is walking or running towards you, right? You're not saying, oh, look at Tony the tiger, right?
That's
so
right.
I love that image because it's like, oh, right. Like I can be gracious to you as long as I know you're not trying to harm me right in this moment.
Right.
So that, again, I like using those little tricks. It's like, oh, okay, that makes a little sense, right?
Yeah.
Because we get beat up on a lot and we beat up each other and we beat ourselves up for like, oh, I'm not acting out of grace. Well, if you're in a state of feeling threatened, right, then it's like, oh, well, wait a minute. That becomes the thing that needs to be addressed.
I gotcha. So like when our processing power, like a computer, is being used just in relationships, then we have enough capacity to be kind, gracious, loving, and attentive to one another. But when part of our bandwidth is being used for an imminent threat, then maybe the other part that's used in relationships becomes a little glitchy. I don't have as much processing power to apply as much grace, as much kindness, as much.
To avoid talking about this for a day and a half, I'll roll with that. Okay. Now, there's these opposing forces in the nervous system that we won't get into, but there's two sides to this sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and digest, and it's this amazing thing where we can chill and it helps us settle. It also has this really emergency capability where it can put out a big parachute and just shut us down into a full tilt freeze. Okay, and there is a time to freeze, right? A great time for grizzly bear attack is a great time to just tuck and freeze. So that's appropriate. So that's the parasympathetic. The sympathetic is fight or flight. Okay, so they work overly simplified. They balance each other. So what happens is if I'm on my way up, clickety clack, like a what's that, roller coaster, right? Click, click, click. I'm like, oh boy, I'm getting up there, and we're gonna do an exercise that's gonna say, wait a minute, if I don't grab this thing now, I know where this is gonna end. I'm gonna have a fight with my spouse, right? I'm gonna come down on that co-pastor, that leader, that I'm really gonna slam down on them. So this is where we start to look at insight into, oh wait, what is my pattern? Like what happens when I'm under a lot of stress, and grabbing and getting insight into, oh, okay, I better grab this. And then if it gets way too high, that's when the parasympathetic can really shut us down. And that's, again, as we talk about this and we really learn about our nervous systems, and as I work with people, it's amazing when they start to learn, like, oh, there it is. And even myself, my own work, I kept going around the roller coaster, I'm like, man, this is not fun. And again, one of the other silly things that I've come across is like, what makes a roller coaster fun? What's the critical thing?
Fear. No.
Safety.
Yes, safety. But the thing that for me, because it ends.
Not smart. Me.
It ends. No.
It ends. Oh, because it ends. Okay. All right.
The roller coaster ride is like, what are they? I don't know. 90 seconds, 60 seconds. It ends.
Yeah.
But now think about us that a lot of us are riding these roller coaster rides and like, I don't know what happens. All I know is every time I interact with this guy, this happens every single time and I can't handle it. So this is where like God designed this amazing circuitry in this nervous system, but we're not talking about it.
Right on.
We spiritualize it. I prayed about it. Basically, listen, when a lot of us pray, okay, I'm risking it, but basically we are freaking out to the Lord. All right. We're just losing it. Right. Begging and pleading at the high end. We're like, oh, right. And then there's a whole range of things. What God has taught me is like, listen, teach Christians to stop learning this stuff. I think the contemplatives had it, but then we went for a long period of time where I think what happened was it got robbed. It got robbed from us by the New Age, by Satan himself, and said, okay, I'm just going to, they're going to run with it. Eastern mysticism, all these things. So they meditate, they do all these things that really do work, but they cut Christ out of it. Right. But then we lost all of that. Boy, that was a lot. So
no,
I get so excited about this stuff.
No, it's good.
So don't let me jump the gun, but
Okay.
my next question is then, so how do you get off the roller coaster?
Right. Okay. So we're going to come back to this orientation system. Okay. And we're going to notice that we orient to the world primarily through 5 senses. I'm going to hope I get all these. I never usually right. We see, hear, taste, touch. See, I knew it. Smell. Right. Yeah.
Sure.
So, right. Okay. You think after teaching kids all these, so
not a biologist.
So we orient, right. So we orient to those things. So how do we get off of that? We start by noticing, first of all, we all have a patterned orientation to the world. And this is where developmentally we come into the knowledge of, what happens to us in childhood matters, right? So I have not raised my own children. I've contributed to raising other children, all out of traumatic, highly neglectful environments. And they consistently do not know how to orient to their own needs because they were raised by parents who weren't meeting their own needs and then demanded the children to meet theirs. So it's their orientation is, okay, what's going on? They orient to the world very differently. They, is mom okay? Is mom angry? Right? If you're raised in, if mom, so you're oriented and it's like you're looking and you're watching, or tone of voice, right? Like tone of voice. So what we do is we start learning about our orientation system and we slow it down and we change it. It's amazing to me what God has been showing because it's, think about, okay, this is where I need the scriptural. Think about these things that are noble.
Excellent, praiseworthy, all those things.
There you go. So that's orientation. Think about these things. So we'll do it. I'll show you. This is the physical. This is your calisthenics right here for your brain for doing that. The challenge is what we tend to do is without the skill of how to do it in our nervous system, we end up taking these spiritual bypasses, which is we sort of pray about it. We're like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Sounds good. Okay, Lord, yep. And I prayed about it. And it's like, but there was nothing internal. There was no internal shift. And what God's really revealing to me is that's got to happen physiologically in unison with this. So I will show you this. So look around the room. So we're going to compare a couple things and see how quickly it takes you to find something in your room that is irksome, annoying, negative, something that catches you that you wish was different.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Didn't take much, did it? Right? Right. Okay. Now, there's your orientation. Now it's very easy to orient to things that we talked about threat and danger, but this is on a milder level of like, that thing just gets me. Okay, now find something in your room that you like, that feels good to look at. Okay, something concrete and tangible in your room. Okay. Now, I want you to switch between those two things and just see what you notice in your system that feels different between the two.
So my window in my office is extraordinarily dirty. And so it bothers me that it's not clean. But through the window is a massive pine tree. And so I see just not the tree trunk itself, but the pine branches and all that greenery, which is very settling. So when I look at the dirtiness of the window, immediately I'm like, I got to do something about that. So that's what I think that's what my nervous system is kind of like, let's go wipe it down. Right.
Okay. So you feel that forwardness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's that roller coaster. That's the sympathetic. There's something to be done about it. Okay. Yeah. So there you go with that. And then you said the word settling. Oh, wait, when I look at the pine tree, I can settle, right? Okay. Josh, what was it for you?
So I'm in my daughter's room. It has a lot of stuff, but it's got this deflated balloon animal that's just sitting here. It should go in the trash, but it's not in the trash. So that annoys me.
Yeah. And do you hear the mental right? The dialogue that's going on with that, the tape
I
that's
hear
running.
it. I hear it every day.
The should. Okay. So yeah, right. So there's the pattern, right? There it is. There it is.
Right.
Okay. And then what do you notice happening in your body as you orient to it? And when I say body, I think about sensations, think about tension, tightness.
I clench my fists. Like I can tell I'm grabbing my hands tighter. I'm thinking about like getting up and leaving this and cleaning her whole room.
Yeah, you start chewing your gum a little harder too.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry. I'm tracking that as a therapist. Like, you know. So again, we're really clenching. That's right. That's right. And then now shift to the one thing that you found that brings you joy.
Okay.
So go ahead and do that again. And Clint, as he's doing that, I want you to watch his eyes. And then everybody's watching this, but we can watch his eyes of like, right. Yeah. Yeah. So you did that weird thing, right?
Yeah, let's shrink him. I've always wanted this, Mary. Let's do this.
No, we can't. But Josh, I want you to go ahead and look at the bump in the balloon thing again now. Go look at the balloon that bothers you.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know, Clint, if you could track that, but you could see the jaw tension and the eye tension, right? So the whole musculature works differently, right? Wow. So we could play with the same thing, is that you can go between the glass and the tree right now in your own body, and this is your orientation, okay? Right? So, and I'm seeing there too, and this is a good time, the question about how do you find release from stressful situations when there is no escaping for a time. So this is brilliantly adaptive to that, because again, really as children, we don't have much power and control. And this example was a mom trying to work from home, taking care of kids. This is where you have profound control. We tend to focus on what we don't have control over, right? So now what we can do is, wait a minute, I can control, and this is again scriptural, right? We think about the fruit of the Spirit, for example, self-control, where I look and what I'm paying attention to. So we can use this very same thing is when we're in a situation we can't get out of, we can always choose what we're orienting to. These are the things when you read people like Viktor Frankl, who survived, right? And Frank, that if you look in these readings, they chose what to look at, and the great missionaries and all these people that we were looking, and Paul, right? What he tells us, where did he put his focus? Do you look at the pine tree on the other side of the dirty glass, or do you look at the dirty glass? Same thing. Do you look at the fact that now you're home, stuck at home, homeschooling your children, right? You're out of control of that. That is true. What this situation has shown us is that we in general have very little control. It's an illusion. But it's completely transformational when we take and say, wait a minute, but I can control what I look at. Right. And this is the very first little exercise. We start out with little exercise, and this becomes, it's the key. It grows and grows, just like with the journey of sanctification. It's like, wait a minute, right now I can look at the tree or the dirty glass. For me, the dirty windows in my house make me nuts. Dirty floors, and I zero in under stress. When I'm flipping out, you could eat off of my floors because I can control that. So, but it's a balancing act too, because if I can't pull my attention off of it, right, then just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm stuck here. I can't believe that these people are doing this thing to me. Right? Like taking all my rights. I wigged myself out last week, right? I have no liberties. They're robbing me of my liberties. I was focusing on what they were taking from me versus, wait a minute, I'm losing my mind. And this is where we get that, wait, I'm losing my mind. Yeah. I'm losing my temper. I'm disengaging and I'm going into my corner. I'm not going to talk to you for another 6 hours, right? So we see that's all the nervous system at the core.
So there really is like, to just kind of like put it back into us, especially as leaders, like I do control myself. like I have this control, or I mean, we would say it a little bit differently as believers, right? Yeah. Which is I am going to surrender my control, especially if it's like way crazy. Right. I'm going to surrender my control to the Holy Spirit, who will keep me focused on the right kinds of things as I'm going forward.
Right. Right. Here's the thing, what I've learned, and primarily I work with Christians in my practice, and listen, I came to this insight from my own journey, right? In my own therapy process, I'm like, I'm not doing something right here. Something's not going right, because I've been on this wheel for a while.
Yeah.
And I'm still a really bold person that gets pretty mad pretty easily. So like, and I'm studying the fruit, so until I started getting this nervous system working, I'm like, oh, hey, wait a second. If I can get my mind off of that thing that annoys me, but I needed a skill. I guess that's the thing, is I needed the skill. I've read so many, I'm done reading self-help books, right? Because it's like, I end up feeling worse, because I'm like, now that's another thing that I don't do well. Right. I can choose to look at a tree instead of a dirty window and I get lots of opportunity. We look through windows. We can do that a million times. People, what next? What next? No, this is it. When you're sitting with a person and you're thinking about, all you can think about is how annoying, right, what your kid does, right? Yeah. Versus, oh, you know what? I love that striped shirt. I'm just going to I love that striped shirt, right? Okay, right? I love my dog, and you're looking at things. So you're looking at things that are tangible for the beginning part of it. It never fails. It's incredible. Things you can see, things that you can taste. So say you're at a meal, right? And you're tasting food. It's like, oh, okay. So instead of being annoyed by listening to that person talking to you, or being angered, right? During a meeting, a lunch meeting, for example, right? And say there's something going on and the other people in leadership, and this ship is not going the direction you want it to be going, right? You disagree with what's going on. You could say, hey, I'm going to choose right now to notice there's some pepper, and I like the lettuce and the ranch dressing. And what you're doing is you're taking your attention. This is the point when people say, oh, okay, so you want me to distract myself? No, I do not. I want you to direct your mind. So what verses are there? There's those verses, right? All verses about a bit in a horse's mouth. Things about slowing the metaphor, right? We look at Proverbs. Proverbs is full of this stuff of metaphors about how we're slowing ourselves down, slowing our minds down, right? Closing our mouths, right? So ultimately self-control. Again, my frustration as a believer was like, that's all well and good, but I don't know how. Yep. And I love that this is the physical task. I'm going to start naming things. Any of us who've been around young children, like, oh, they're always into it, right? What's this, right? If you're really, really, really upset and distressed and you're flipping out, you go with really simple things, right? Just like a child learning language. Because here's the other thing. The more distressed you are, the more activated your sympathetic nervous system is, okay? Or the more in freeze you are, the less clearly you can think with the frontal part of your brain.
Right.
Okay. So this is the beauty of saying, I'm just going to notice right now, and I'm going to hang out here and notice things and name them.
That's right. Yeah, because it brings your brain back on. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Exactly.
The front part of your brain, what does that do? Like complex reasoning and things like that? Or
that's the executive. It's executive function. So think about being executive leader. You're executing action. So it's the thing you need. It's your Wi-Fi. It's your cloud up there. So one of the ways, the more distressed you get, smaller your window, right? Your signal gets weak. So you know how, well, I'm older, but tapping buttons or doing whatever we do now to try to get signal. It's like, listen, the signal's weak. Doesn't matter. It's like when you're waiting for a elevator and you think it's not going to come any faster.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So we have a comment about like gratitude. Like, will gratitude bring instant relief? And I guess I would change the word just a bit to say it's not so much gratitude. It's a deliberate appreciation is how I would frame it. Maybe they're synonyms, but what I want to do is not just because gratitude is, I think it's a little more passive, maybe at least the way that I'm sensing that.
Sure.
But I want to be more active and more directive, is that I'm going to, on purpose, intentionally, deliberately appreciate. And so that looks like, God, I'm grateful for this house that I live in. And things, it's just, you could name like air, I'm just so glad I can breathe.
Yeah.
I mean, just anything that comes into your awareness, you're just deliberately appreciating that gift from God, and then you're really bringing yourself to a place of presence. As I've heard you and my wife Christina talking about this, you're really bring your senses back, not in a distance, not in a worry, not a concern that may or may not happen externally to you. You're bringing things back into my my space and my presence to just kind of get a sense of, I'm here, I'm in my chair, my feet are on the floor, and that brings me some presence.
Yeah, I think as I hear you talking, that gratitude might be the result of doing that. That as I process what you're saying, it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to notice the things that I like and that are bringing me some joy, and that I'm glad that they are. And then I would almost be like the gratitude, like, oh, wait, yeah, this is pretty great. You know, like once in a while I'll orient to gravity. Like God's really been bringing that. Like that's a pretty amazing thing that we're not all floating around. I mean, I guess it could be fun for a while, but we need gravity, right?
Yeah.
And so, and notice all the ways, right? That, oh, that's pretty great. We don't have to wear lead shoes, you know? And so it brings about, again, what I love about this is in the nervous system, taking it, settling it down, just like you said, right? I use that helium balloon metaphor of our mind. I don't know. Again, I believe like it's a revelation, but I feel like that's where we so are designed in God's image. And I think that he really, really showed that in our minds, that our minds are so eternal in that they really capture the essence of God. But here's the challenge. Our bodies can only be present in this moment. Our minds can go in the future, and they can go in the past, and they can go sideways. They can go cattywampus. And meanwhile, our body sits here and gets in more distress. So the key is to bring the mind into the present moment. So again, we do that through that orienting, right? Get ourselves landed. So imagine yourself grabbing that, helium balloon of your mind and saying, no, we're going to be right here, right now.
That's good.
And then you settle in. And then from this place, if this is the weight and this is your mind up there, you gave it very little. Again, if you look scripturally, that's what we're doing, right? It's right here. Then from this place, think and plan about the future, right? Reflect about the past. This is also an amazing transformational place from which to pray.
Yeah.
Is do the orienting and settle in. And then you do an embodied prayer, being fully present with God. And I've been stunned, and it's amazing because you come to the Lord and his presence in a completely different place.
Yeah. And then it begins to be, maybe I'll use this illustration, like a child just crawling up in a lap, and you don't have to say anything. Right. You just get to be present. And we get to be, just real and focused and not saying a whole lot, probably not worrying or complaining like we might have a tendency to do otherwise. Right. But now we just get to be present with the Lord.
Right.
So Mary, I think practically, like for our pastors and ministry leaders who are watching or will catch this on the replay, I mean, this seems as though I could use some of this as I'm talking with people. I got to get this. It's going to drive me nuts. As I'm talking with people about this conversation with you and Zoom, and we're going to enter into some prayer time, right? Maybe one thing that I could do is to say, hey, I just want you to deliberately appreciate just your environment. Just there are some things that are in your environment. So it's not like, it's not like, I'm all of a sudden I'm dishing like psychotherapy that I have no business dishing out, but I can tell them like, hey, let's just thank the Lord for our environment real quickly. Like where we are in this space. Let's do that first. And we do that for a little bit. And then we say, let's appreciate the Lord for who the Lord is, his character, or what he's been showing us. Let's appreciate. And so what I'm doing, I think, is I'm getting present, step one. And then I am turning all the circuits on in the brain because I'm connecting relationally with the person that I'm with and with the Lord, right?
Yeah.
And then we can move from there.
Well, but I
correct
think
me.
I think it's important to we got to understand where people start from. So sometimes people come in a high state of distress. Okay. So this is where it gets. Let me just say, because you're going to have people respond, and our experience developmentally. If you've been raised like these young ladies that we contributed to their lives, their capacity to feel the presence of the Lord is very different from mine when I was raised in a faith-based home with a secure, present mother and father. Yep. So sometimes that's the very first thing that we need to name. It's like, oh, wait, this is hard for me. So I would say naming the reality of like, oh yeah, you know what, this is hard for me. And saying, you know, but God's grace is present, like, so that, because we can get into, right, when we get into praying together and meeting together, it's like, this is so often the case. Like, yeah, but it's amazing how many people just can't access God. And, it's hard. He's intangible.
Yeah.
So when you've had really rough upbringing, that's not available to you, that's even harder. So I find it's really critical to say, listen, this isn't always easy. Okay. And so no matter where you are right now, right, let's orient to what really is in the reality. And there, yes, you're pulling it into the present moment, and then you're stitching in. And how about now if we notice, how is God making himself present? So again, you're choosing what you orient to in what order, so that now you're starting to bring this prefrontal cortex online, helping people settle. And it really should just be a disciplined way of how you start every single meeting. Now, I've tried to build this into my own practice when I meet people. It's a discipline because I'm pretty high energy. I mean, it takes a lot of effort, but in general, yes. So you're bringing people into the moment so that you're all more settled.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. We were talking with District Superintendent Jeff Miller last week, and we were talking about praying, and he had mentioned in conflict situations with elders and ministry leaders that the stakes are high in those meetings, and that one of the things that he does is he just says, everyone's going to pray, and we're all going to worship the Lord together. And that's a really simple way to do what we're describing, to bring people into a place of calm. It might be very short, but then we're going to turn their circuits on by getting them relational and tuning their attention towards the Lord, away from the conflict and towards him.
Yeah.
So that's just another way of briefly entering into what Mary is talking about.
Yeah.
But for more of a deeper dive, I think what you're saying is just really excellent, that we can really tune in and find things that can make us calm and make us present.
Right. And think about, again, it's the orientation of, we can look at the uncertainty, for example, of the current environment. I can look at all the liberties I've lost and freak myself out. And then I'm like, no, wait, God is sovereign. Wait, he is sovereign. And I just settle right down, because it just brings it all into perspective.
Absolutely. And in this COVID era, we'll just call it that for however long it's going to last. In this COVID era, one of the best things that we can do as leaders is to bring this sense of sturdy and calm into the environments that we bring. If we're just whipping up more frantic, that is not going to bode well for our leadership or for those who we are trying to lead. But we need to be sturdy and stable. And that is something that these live conversations, Josh, we cannot get away from these internals. We're back to intimacy with Christ. We're back in, these conversations together. You don't move too far away from Jesus in any of this. And we've talked about loads of different topics in these sessions. But boy, I'm really grateful just to, again, getting a sense of, I'm here, I'm present, I'm directing my mind. And then also I can bring that into other people that I'm ministering to is, let's be calm together. We don't have to be revved up. Let's be calm.
So here's the great thing about that is that you don't even need those words, because I'm going to tell you, if you're in the presence of somebody who's on the upper end up here, when you put out the words, hey, let's be calm, it's actually a misattunement. And so we can't actually tell someone to be calm. It's not effective. What you have is the most powerful thing which God gave you, which is, we can notice, and even when you watch this tape, you're going to notice that our rate of speech is slower now than it was 45 minutes ago.
Yeah.
So the cool thing is if you, again, it's about the embodiment in your being. You can slow your own pace down, start to use your tone of voice, right? So again, one of the things that happens when we orient to threat is our vocal muscles. Our nervous system is so amazing. I could talk about this for days, but they constrict. And so we end up with a much more monotone way of speaking. So what we want to do is we want to get into this and use these. And what happens is, because God wired us relationally, we can bring someone into what we call co-regulation through our nervous system. So he gave us these amazing things called mirror neurons. So it's like what happens when you teach a baby to eat and you want that baby to open its mouth. What do? That's right. Come on, Josh.
You open your mouth.
That's right. And then amazingly, right, that little one, all right, and it's like, oh, because there's a mirror neuron that lights up. It's so amazing, all the science of it, that just brings glory to God, right? He's so amazing in this. So we can use that to, again, co-regulate. We can either co-dysregulate, meaning help somebody lose it with us. And that's what we'll do. We'll help, hey, oh yeah, this is awful. Like you were just saying, this is, really get people all jazzed up about it, or take a deep breath, feel the ground underneath you, get your own self settled, and then help your mind get settled and develop the discipline of speaking only from this place. And what you'll immediately find is that you don't talk nearly as much because you're spending most of your time trying to just get settled. But the beauty of it is the way God designed us is that act is a leadership, right? You're leading. You're always leading. It just is a matter of how and where you're, right?
Oh, that's a good word.
You're always leading your people, whether
you
know they're following you or not. But it's like, okay, the best thing we have to offer people is yes, Jesus, right? But here's the thing, what we miss as Christians, right? We're in a dysregulated state and we're like, hey man, you just need Jesus. How do you not get this, right? It's like, because of dysregulation, we lose the message. So how do we come into grace? We feel that chair underneath us. We'll say, man, God is good. I don't know what you think, but wow, right? And then it's a radically different message.
Absolutely. We're getting a couple of comments, Mary, so maybe we could turn our attention. So I want to start with Dan. Dan, thanks for that comment. Glory to God indeed. Co-regulate is my new word for the day. Yeah. When we are leading in this way, it's kind of the art of borrowing. And so as leaders, what we can do is we can set pace. And so then people can pace alongside of us and they'll actually borrow the pace that we have set for them in our meetings and in our situations. So friends, neighbors, counseling sessions, it doesn't really matter. Our pace, our body language, our tone, our rate of speech, everything can be borrowed from us if we can set and pace alongside.
Now, and let me just add to that you got to hang tough with it, because if people are really up here and you come in here, it's a misattunement and they can get a little bit more jazzed. You got to stay with it. You got to stay with it.
No, that's good. Les McMahon, Les, I know your wife Angie works in the healthcare field, and so he says, what would we suggest, or Mary, what would you suggest? I'm not going to put my 2 cents in here. For those who are on the front line as healthcare workers, many are constantly hearing, be safe, and it's reminding them of the danger that they walk into daily. What could we pass along to Les and Angie during this season?
I think this is where we're experiencing it's very hard to uncouple caution and wisdom, right, from danger, and fear. So they get overcoupled, so they become one and the same, So what we're trying to do is saying, right, I'm being cautious, right? I'm being cautious and I'm doing these. But again, it's about orientation. Choose what you're orienting to, which is God's sovereignty, right? Wisdom. What's the wisest thing to do? I'm using my mask. Right? What do I have control over? Where my mind goes. So using the protocols that help you. Some people really this is how we get kind of into superstitions and habits that people, so we want to stay in the healthy end of what's a discipline that really helps me. So when he says what we say to people like that or constantly reminded, it's a constant work. This is what COVID is showing us. We don't have the margin of safety that we have. We can kind of, I can kind of get off course and nothing really bad happens. We have very little margin right now. It's a formational time. We now have the opportunity to form. Listen, right now, the next greatest generation is on the ground somewhere, guys. They're here. We're modeling for them how to cope with this. We can form the next greatest generation of powerful leaders. but it's in us to say, okay, wait, what do we have control over? That's what it requires. What do I have control over? The other thing is, to be perfectly honest, is to inform the people you're in relationship with. Say, hey, you know what? Really not helpful for me when you say that.
Yeah.
And really being honest about it.
Yep.
Or informing people, hey, this is how I need you to pray.
That's right. Yeah, that's good. And that's hard for those of us who are in the Midwest. I mean, that's a hard step to take because it feels like such a slap in the face. But we can say that in a really nice, kind, Midwestern way.
Well, if you come back to, right, finding gravity and saying it only from a place of like, this is what I really need.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Pamela Rohr has a question. She asks, what advice do you have for the person who you approach and kind of their machine gun, she describes them. They're not listening. They're just spewing, brrr, Do you end the conversation and suggest to continue another time? Or how can we model and love and care and provide grace?
So this is right where it gets cattywampus for Christians, because I'm going to say this, but it might rile also. Listen, no boundaries does not equal grace. Okay, people? Having no boundaries does not mean you're being gracious. Yeah. All right? So if somebody's machine gunning at you, love, God gave us hands for lots of things, and this is one of them. Yeah. Wow. You really are upset, and I got to end the conversation. This isn't going to go anywhere good, right? Wow, I need to step back. This is too much for me. But this is what I say is the body doesn't lie. Let me tell you right now, you have the impulse. There's a lot of times where we just want to do this, right? So we soften it a little bit. Instead of this, we're like, hey, this is a lot. Like I'm way up to here. We've used all this language. We know, we're like, man, I'm up to here. I'm up to here. I'm up to my eyeballs. It's your window of tolerance. You're like, hey, I'm barely coping here. Being honest in the moment and saying, wow, this is just too much for me right now. Now, again, person may not be able to take it right then, but the alternative is that we don't say it and we end up talking about them behind their back, right? Getting distressed ourselves. So it's a lot of work. This is a constant thing. Yeah.
And it's just a pressure cooker right now because of the environment but we deal with what you're talking about. We deal with this all the time in normal life, but this is exacerbated because of the distance that we feel from one another. And so how are we gonna do all of this? And Pam, you're right. COVID doesn't allow us to see each other. So because we're now talking heads to each other in many cases, you don't get the rest of the physical stance. You don't get what else is going on, or those types of things. And so it's hard.
Well, so on that note, I will just say to you, my old fashioned, but it scientifically, neurologically, and spiritually matches. Do not have any relationally important conversations via text, never, or email. If you can't do it with visual and with voice, don't have the conversation. You wait. If you can do Zoom, if you can do FaceTime, and you have that in this day and age, then do it that way. But don't do relational work via text.
Yeah, that's
ever with anybody.
I'm just thinking about Pam's comment one last time, and I don't want to completely go back around the mountain here. I will say, for someone who is a verbal processor and is just going bam, 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 they'll run out of words eventually. Like,
I don't know.
So there are some of these, and I think we can graciously say, hey, you know what? It sounds like you're really revved up about that, right? And so you're listening and you're listening. You're like, yeah, like I'm angry about that. Okay, well, what's it going to take for you to, jump off?
So
that
right
train?
there, here's the cool thing. I want to name what you just did is you just attuned to them. See, this is what we miss, is that we get afraid of naming what's really happening. It's interesting that as people, we think that if we name the emotion of what's going on, it'll make it worse. But research shows that it actually calms the nervous system because it's a way of attuning. So name the elephant in the room.
That's good.
And it settles, right? It settles.
Yep.
If in fact you're dealing with a verbal processor, the next thing to do is say, hey, I'm getting confused between what you want to talk about and like what you're verbally processing, right? So you can bring that into clarity too. Like, do you want me to respond, or did you want to just like, blow steam? Because if that's the case, I'll listen, but not with the same intensity that I would as if we were having a conversation.
Yeah. Josh will sometimes say when I'm verbally processing, hey, bottom line that thing. What are you driving at? And that's just a way for me to go, oh, okay, I'll get off this train. Yeah. But it's just, but again, it forces me to say, this is what I mean about it. So bottom line that, okay, this is what I mean about that. Great. Can we be done? So, and just kind of moving on.
Yeah.
Guys, we're getting to an hour. I have so appreciated this conversation, and we could continue on. Josh, are there any other questions that you have for Mary as we kind of begin to wrap up our conversation today?
Man, I have so many questions.
I know, it's good stuff, isn't it?
My hour is up. Yeah, I could talk about this for a long time too, even though I have absolutely no idea what I'd be talking about. But mostly just questions. Maybe we could have Mary back sometime soon.
That would be fantastic, Mary. If you wouldn't mind joining us again, that'd be great.
This is where I live and breathe.
It's good. So let's do a final thought. Josh, you go first on this, and then Mary, if you wouldn't mind giving a final summary thought, and then I'll wrap us up. Josh, final thought.
That's a good question. I think the final thought for me is the idea of, what was it? What you set your eyes on, orientation. Is that the right word? And fixing your eyes on Jesus. Think about things that are good, noble. All of those things are so important, and it's not just a spiritual practice. It actually is effective all over the place, emotional, mental, physiological. I thought that was a beautiful thing. Thanks for shedding some light on that.
Mary, final thought from you?
I think that as leaders in development, to know the most powerful thing we have to model for people and lead them by is how we behave and how we're doing in our own being. So again, I love what Dan had commented on, is self-regulation, is self-regulate. Make it the very first thing you do is to come into a zone and get that helium balloon down, and you're golden from there, because at that point you can hear the Holy Spirit. You can hear the still small voice of God in that place.
That's good. Yeah. For me, and my final thought today is that we are leading. I loved Mary's line. We're leading all the time. We're always leading. We're always influencing as leaders. And so the way that we're going to do that could be at a fever pitch, or we could pace well and we could lead people into peace. Because if I'm peaceful and I'm orienting, then I can lead others into this peacefulness, right? I can lead others to the peace giver, who is Jesus, and I can allow them, based off of the calm that I experience because of his presence, they can experience that calm as well. I would also say that if you find yourself in a flurry, in a frenzy, and then you're trying to help another person, all you're going to do is whip them up into a frenzy as well, because they'll match me as the leader, and they will not pace alongside of me in a healthy and productive way. Yeah. So I think that's my final thought for this conversation today. Josh, Mary, it's so good to be with you guys today. Thanks again, Mary, for your time.
Yeah,
we really appreciate it. Yeah, and as we progress further on in this COVID-19 crisis, we'll circle back around, especially I think there'll be another wave of, now we're coming out of isolation. It's one thing to deal with the isolation. Now we're coming out of isolation, and we're trying to figure out with the mask or with this. Again, now I'm close to you, but I still can't figure you out. That does some tricky things to our brains as well. So we would love to have you back on the show in the future. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. Have a great one.
Thanks, Mary.